Hi, Brett. Good morning. We can see you. I know it's very early for you.
I wish I was in Paris. It's quite late or quite early, depending on how you
Okay,
interpret it.
I'll hand you over and I'll stay as well if there's questions and answers at the end. Have a good conference.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you very much. Well, good morning. My name is Brett Perry. I'm a business development principal at Virgin Orbit. I'm sorry I can't be in person today in Paris. I wish I could. It's a fantastic conference, and I can't wait to make it back out next year. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share some slides. Great. Okay, so I think you should be able to see my screen. So so today I really want to, I'm going to, for those that aren't familiar with Virgin Orbit, I'm going to introduce who we are, what we do with our launcher system. But for today's conversation, I really want to focus on how Launcher One and responsive space can fold into developing an operational framework for collaboration amongst allies, which is something which is a key theme that we're really seeing a lot of movement towards in this era of the new space chapter. So for those that aren't familiar with Virgin Orbit, we're a US-based launch services company focused on providing the most flexible and responsive access to orbit for small satellites. We do this with our Launcher One system, which is depicted here. Launcher One is capable of launching between 300 and 500 kilograms to low Earth orbit. So that 300 being to a sun synchronous 500 kilometer altitude, and the 500 kilogram being to an equatorial orbit. The system is comprised of three main components that you see here. One is the carrier aircraft, or Cosmic Girl, which you see right here. And then the second element is the Launcher One vehicle, which is mounted under the left wing. Launcher One is a two-stage rocket that uses liquid oxygen in RP1. The last element is our mobile launch site, which I'll talk more about in my presentation later today. And that's the set of the ground support equipment trailers that you see at the bottom. All of those trailers are really mobile, which is critical because the mobility of the system allows us to turn essentially any airport with a long enough runway for 747 and the right spaceport regulatory regime into a horizontal orbital launch pad. With an air launch system like Launcher One, it offers some unique advantages that I'll talk a little bit about further. But the key elements being, in addition to being able to deliver payloads, to orbit on the schedule that our customers want, is we have the ability to really go to the desired, very specific and desired orbits, which is really critical as when we look at what is happening in the era of constellations today. We're seeing a transition where operators are trying to have proven out their technology, have proven out their satellite platforms, are in a spot where they're trying now to populate their satellites over specific areas of interest that are tailored for their mission need. With an air launch system, we have the flexibility to hit any orbit from equatorial all the way to retrograde and allow operators to really tailor their mission to tailor the orbit around the mission rather than the other way around. To reinforce the mobility, with an air launch system, we are fully transportable, which eliminates the need for extensive ground infrastructure. This is critical. So what you see right on the left is a snapshot of our mobile launch infrastructure. And what you see on the right are some concepts for how all that equipment can be quickly mobilized in a cargo variant of a 747 and deployed to a new spaceport. What's very unique about the system with the mobility is that it offers several advantages. One, it allows countries and spaceport operators to stand up a sovereign launch capability without having to invest in the significant infrastructure and resources that come with a traditional vertical launch pad. The other key element is is with the mobility that we have, is we have a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of the sites that we can deploy to. Right now at Virgin Orbit, we have conducted 3 launches from our Mojave, California spaceport, but we also have spaceports in Florida, Guam, the UK at Cornwall at UK Airport, as well as in Oita, Japan, and Alcantara in Brazil. What's very exciting is with a global spaceport architecture, we are able to provide our customers with multiple launch points and really the ability to ship payloads or to launch from within the region, but also leverage, from a government standpoint to help facilitate international partnerships through these launches. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Just to recap, for those that were at Paris Space Week, the last time it was in person in early 2020, we were just on the verge of conducting our first launch. Since then, we've conducted 3 successful launches, all within less than a year. The first launch was for NASA through the Venture Class Launch Services program, and the following 2 missions were for the U.S. Space Force via the U.S. Space Test Program. What's exciting is those missions also included secondary rideshare payloads from the Royal Netherlands Air Force, which included their first satellite, Brick 2, but also from a Polish company called Sat Revolution and Spire on our last launch. Going back to the responsiveness that we offer, what's interesting is with the Spire payload on our last launches, we went from call up to integration in less than 22 days, which is a real testament to the flexibility and the responsiveness that Virgin Orbit's Launcher One system provides to the small satellite community. But that's just how we're getting started. Going with the responsiveness that we offer, we are standing up an array and pursuing an array of efforts with different allies to develop and deploy an allied responsive launch capability. So I've mentioned a couple of missions that we've done for the Space Force, and but another exciting activity that we're pursuing is conducting our first launch from Cornwall later this year. So this is a really exciting project in partnership with the Cornwall Council, the UK Space Agency, as well as the UK Ministry of Defence and other elements of the UK government, where we are building a set of ground support equipment in the UK in partnership with UK industry, and building the foundation for a sovereign launch capability based out of UK Airport in Cornwall. This is very exciting because it not only will be stimulating the local ecosystem with that regional access, but with that sovereign access to space. But from an allied perspective, it provides a new type of flexibility in the sense that it enables or serves as a hub for potentially missions or joint allied missions conducted from the site. That's just one partnership, though. As you can see some of the flags here for some of the other partners that we're working with. And this is just a real testament to the interest that we're seeing in responsive space from an array of allies. And a big part of that interest is being able to work together. But stepping back, why responsive space? Well, in today's environment, in a peer competition, the space domain is very contested with different kinetic and non-kinetic beams that threaten legacy space capabilities, which are exquisite, large, and often very vulnerable. These systems are very slow to replace. So currently, the timelines to replace are years or sometimes decades. And this model in the current environment requires a new way of thinking. And that is really responsive space. Enabled by small satellites and proliferated architectures and new ways to access space in affordable and responsive manners, allies now have the ability to leverage responsive space capabilities to quickly reconstitute capabilities in space and preserve the resilient and build in the resilience that's needed to continue to operate without losing access to their space capabilities. So responsive space missions are truly allied by design, which is a new phrase that we're going to start to hear more and more. And these elements, when you look at a responsive space mission, it contains multiple elements. One is going back to what I touched on at the beginning of the discussion, are novel orbits. So the ability now for operators of constellations to deploy their satellites into orbits that are specific, that are tailored for very specific missions. This could be providing coverage over a certain area, extended dwell time over another, or filling a gap that was to replace a capability that was lost. Essentially with responsive space, the focus is on going to the orbit that's going to maximize the mission's immediate impact. The other element, which I touched on, are the number of locations to conduct of where the launch can originate. Right now, when you look at the launch, the vertical launch infrastructure, it's a limited number of ranges, and each of those ranges face their own limitations, whether those are environmental or the number or the inclinations and orbits that can be accessed from each range. For instance, if you're launching out of the Cape Canaveral for a sensitive mission, adversaries monitoring that mission will know the timeline for when that payload will be prepared, and will also be able to decipher the orbit it's going to because of the known geographic limitations of the site. With an array of launch sites, this creates a level of unpredictability for adversaries in terms of trying to assess where launches would occur from, and it also provides that flexibility. So, for instance, when you look at sites like close to the equator, like what you see here, like Ascension Island or Diego Garcia or Alcantara in Brazil or Guam at Andersen Air Force Base, several of those sites not only can access multiple inclinations from equatorial all the way up to high polar or even retrograde, but in some of those sites there are multiple azimuths and multiple drop points that really make it hard for an observer to identify where one will launch. The other aspects of responsive space are the unique mission ConOps. So this really boils down to the needs of the mission need to determine the requirements and not the other way around. And this has been a challenge when we step back and look at some of the developments in the space industry. But with the flexibility of launch systems like Launcher One and commercial small satellite platforms, the modularity is there for the mission needs to really be tailored around the requirements. And then last but not least is just a list of some of the example missions that can be achieved by responsive space. These range from replacing a capability in orbit that's been lost, whether that's due to an on-orbit anomaly or another activity. Some other items are on-call space domain awareness. So as we're seeing more objects in space, we're starting to realize that detection of the objects not just is not enough, but rather there's a increasingly growing need to be able to get up to certain objects that are of interest and to be able to characterize them. Then some other items are, missile defense replacement and other elements that impact space control. But ultimately, the takeaway here from this slide is really how allied cooperation with a number of partners that have been both operating in the space domain for a long time, but are also new to the space domain, can really work together to build out a multilateral responsive space capability to achieve that resilience necessary in space. So this slide here shows just a kind of what a scenario looks like in terms, going from the call up all the way to the responsive launch. So a big part of this is leveraging the mobility and the investments into having payloads already pre-encapsulated with modular small satellite platforms. Then once the mission is tasked, so to speak, the boosters and the fairings can be pulled together and quickly deployed, before a launch campaign and launched into orbit. A big part of this is not only having payloads that are available, but having in an air launch system that's mobile, but is having rockets ready. And at Virgin Orbit, we've invested a significant amount into our factory so that we can build rockets to rate to ensure that boosters are ready to support these on-call missions. With that, I want to be respectful of time, and so I want to open it up and see if there are any questions. Really excited to be presenting again at the Paris Space Week conference, and I wish I could be there in person, but looking forward to the Q&A as well as following up with many of you offline through the meetings. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Oh.
Thank you so much for the great presentation. This is Andrzej Binkowski from Nordcap, Luxembourg. We learned last year about your cooperation with Sat Revolution from Wrocław. Can you give us a little bit of details? How do you come up with this cooperation, and what are the prospects? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So great question. So for those that aren't familiar, I touched on it a little bit in the presentation, but Virgin Orbit, we've not only had the opportunity to launch some of the Sat Revolution payloads to space, but are partnering them on other activities. And so to help answer your question in terms of what this is, really, and as we're stepping back and looking at how the space market is evolving, we're seeing a growing shift and a growing demand for turnkey end-to-end solutions. It's less so much where customers, both on the government side and the commercial side, are asking for, we want this satellite, we want this launch, we want this payload, but more and more they're coming and they're saying, here's the application I want, or I have wildfires I need help coveraging, or I need ISR over this part of the region, or I want to build a constellation for IoT. These types of requirements really increase the need to have an turnkey end-to-end solution. And so with partnering with companies like Sat Revolution that have not only an on-orbit heritage, but also a very ambitious roadmap in terms of how they plan to scale their constellation and really leverage the advances in small satellite technology. They're naturally a great partner for being able to bring this end-to-end capability to partners. And a recent example of that is an ongoing project that we announced a couple of weeks ago with Sat Revolution and ETCO and the Sultanate of Oman, which is where we're working with the Sultanate to not only help assemble and launch the first satellite from our first UK launch this upcoming summer, but also pursue a deep space exploration mission and do this in a way that not only fulfills the mission requirements of the Sultanate, but also builds that local ecosystem to help stimulate their space industry.
Thanks, Brett. Any more questions?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Mr. Perry. Does Virgin Orbit still have plan to have launch capabilities from Asia, Japan, I think?
Yes, so that's a really great question. I think one of my slides had a map in showing some of our different spaceports, and Japan was on there. It may have looked a little small, but that's a great question. So Virgin Orbit, we are partnering with to conduct launches from the Oita Airport, and that's in partnership with the Oita Prefecture government as well as ANA, the airlines. So we are working with all of those parties to have Launcher One infrastructure based in Japan and based in Oita to be able to provide the launch needs. And this really ties into, it's not only about serving the local economy and the regional economy, but Japan, when we look at Japan, we see a very vibrant, a really strong growing space market. And also, there are also a lot of opportunities on the government side around, allied cooperation, multilateral cooperation through groups such as the Quad and other initiatives. So we're working to stand up that capability in Japan, hopefully within, by the end of 2023, early 2024. We're working kind of around. I mean, we've been working against COVID, but that will be our next spaceport following Cornwall this summer.
Thank you. Any more questions? Well, Brett, thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's early, and now you can log off. And hopefully we'll have you with us next year on site.
Likewise. Thank you so much. I wish I could be there in person, but I'll be on later this afternoon virtually if anybody has any questions. And my email and my contact information is also online via the app. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Paris Space Week.
Thank you.